get started. There's the delay. Fix the sound so you guys don't lose your eardrums. I think that's fine. Yeah, that's all right. All right. Let's go ahead and get started on the next section. Let me see here. Let me change the title. This is pre-flop. 35 to 65 big blinds. Or 35 to 60 big blinds. And this will be part one of this section. There we go. Why is that not updating? Okay, looks good. Let's just jump in. Oh, there it is.
Have a deep stack when you have more than 60 big blinds. Let's discuss how your strategy should change as your stack size decreases, which will inevitably happen in a poker tournament. Let's first discuss when you have between 35 and 60 big blinds, and then later we'll discuss how you should further adjust as your stack gets even shallower. The reason you should be adjusting as your stack decreases is because your stack to pot ratio decreases. This essentially compares your stack size, or the effective stack size in play, to the current pot to evaluate how your strategy should change and the risk you have to take to play any individual pot. So, stack to pot ratio is the effective stack size divided by the money in the pot. So, as an example of this, let's suppose someone raises to 2.5 big blinds out of their 50 big blind stack, and then we call on the button. The money in the pot in this scenario will be our opponent's 2.5 big blind raise, our call, and then the small blind to big blind in the ante, which is 2.5 big blinds more. So that's 7.5. The effective stack would be 50 minus the 2.5 raise, which gives us 47. So let me just show you how to figure this out real quick. Actually, 47.5, right? 47.5 divided by 7.5 equals 6.3. So in this scenario, the stack to pot ratio is 6.3, and you see we're still roughly in this high category. It's going to play pretty much like you would play a deeper stack. But as your stack starts to decrease a little bit more, like let's say we have 40 big blinds, now it would be 37.5 divided by 7.5, which equals 5. So you see, this stack size is where you start to dip from playing a very deep stack strategy to more of a medium stacked strategy, and I'm going to be showing you how to make these proper adjustments. In general, your standards for going all in or just playing big pots with reasonably strong hands is going to decrease as the stack to pot ratio decreases. And that's because you're not risking as much money, so you get to be wrong. You get to lose the pots more often. For example, if you get a hand like top pair when you're playing 25 big blinds deep, you're really happy and you're putting all your money in. But if you have 100 big blinds, you have to be way more cautious, because if someone wants to put in 100 big blinds, then they probably have a pretty strong hand. So as your stack to pot ratio decreases, you're going to find that implied odds hands decrease in value. Like 7-6 of clubs is going to start to go down in value as the stacks get shallower and shallower. And the reason for that is because you have less implied odds, right? Remember how you wanted to be getting about 20 to 1 implied odds with your suited connected hands? Well, now you're just not, right? So these hands decrease in value. Alternatively, strong big cards increase in value, because now if you do make a decently strong top pair, you're just pretty happy putting your money in the pot. Because, like we said earlier, you're just not risking that much money to win the pot, so if you make decently strong top pairs, you're just happy to get it all in. Sometimes you're going to go broke, sometimes you're going to double up, but that is what you have to do when you are playing shallower and shallower stacks. In general, when you are out of position, you're going to be incentivized to go all in or just build the pot. And the reason for that is because when you're out of position and all the money's all in, position doesn't matter anymore because there is no post-flop betting. So you're going to find that there are some scenarios where when someone raises, you're just going to want to jam your whole stack in. And I know that may feel risky, but it completely mitigates your opponent's positional advantage. So that is something you'll also start to see as our stack size decreases. Not so much with...
The interesting thing about that is that when your stack-to-pot ratio decreases, your pre-flop range, like you said, gets much wider. And it's interesting because you would think, oh, you're deeper in the tournament, and this, that, and the other, you have to be more careful. It's actually completely the opposite of that. That's why you risk, if you play in that manner, risk blinding out. You're better off just jamming the chips in with, decent hands in the range, because basically what you're saying is versus the ranges that open. So like very commonly, if you're in the small blind with like King Jack, right, or even Queen 10 or something like that, two big Broadway cards, and you're in the small blind with 25 blinds, and somebody from the cutoff opens, button folds, and it comes to you, it's usually okay just to jam it in. I mean, there's exceptions, like you're on the final table or whatever, or it's a super shallow stack tournament, then there's different, things, but we're talking about where you start with 100 big blinds, you're a few hours in, and, you're at, lower than the average stack. I mean, really that doesn't matter, but it is a factor sometimes. And the fact is that when you jam there, basically what you're saying is, I'm willing to risk it all, so you have to have a hand to call me. And in those scenarios, the proper range that opens against you can't call the majority of the time. Somebody who has, 50 big blinds, and you're playing 25 big blinds effective and you jam, are they really going to put in their half their stack, with a hand like pocket sevens or, an ace jack that they would have raised with, or even, ace 10 suited? A lot of players will give up ace queen right there just because they don't want to be dominated by ace king or something like that. I've seen players, have so little understanding of this concept that they've folded pocket jacks in that scenario, which is just suicide. And it brings up an interesting point because in one of the flights I played last week, I was doing really well. Everything was going fine. I had 28 blinds, and the guy to my right on the button had 27 or something like that. And he opened to 2.5, and that was still pretty much the standard at this point. It was opening pretty big, and I decided just to jam it all in with pocket eights. And the truth of the matter is, he can't call me there the majority of the time, and when he does, the majority of that time, it's a race. Hands like ace king, ace queen, ace jack suited, all the hands that are supposed to call when he makes that open. He happened to have pocket jacks, so it's just one of those things where I got unlucky, but I played the hand correctly. And there is no other way to play that hand. I mean, if you're going to call it pre-flop, you're going to end up in a world of hurt out of position versus somebody whose range is the deck. But especially against a player who's loose, which that guy was, I really was shocked when I ran into the jacks and got eliminated. But it happens.
This exact stack size, but as we get shallower and shallower, you will definitely see that that is the case. So let's discuss when you are folded to. As always, you should generally just follow the game theory optimal charts unless it becomes clear your opponents are making significant mistakes. And whenever everyone folds to you, most of the deep stack concepts we've already discussed will still apply. You'll start to see significant changes, though, when, let's say, you're 3-betting or when you raise and someone 3-bets you. So let's take a look at our default strategy playing 40 big blinds deep when everyone folds to us. You'll see this looks relatively similar to the deeper stacked charts, except for there are actually some subtle differences. I'm going to show you. Let's take a look at the under the gun range, playing 40 big blinds deep. You see we get to raise with 16.1% of hands. When we were 75 big blinds deep, we got to play 13.7% of hands. This may not seem like a big difference, but it actually is. And the reason you get to play more hands when you are shallower stacked is because if you just make these strong top pair hands, you're usually pretty happy getting your money in. So you see hands like ace 10 offsuit and king jack offsuit get added to this chart, right? And that alone is going to allow you to just play a few more hands. Also, take a look at the button range here. You see the button gets to play 50.8% of hands playing 40 big blinds deep, whereas when we were playing 75 big blinds deep, it gets to play 54.8% of hands. And that's because your positional advantage matters a little bit less as you start to get shallower stacks, because the stack to pot ratios are going to be shallower across the board.
This is one of those concepts that people screw up a lot because they think that under the gun, they should be playing tighter when they're in that mid-stack range of, like he said, 40-ish, 50-ish big blinds or something like that. But it's actually not true, because if you have 50 big blinds, you're much more willing to get it in with top pair, top kicker, at least you should be, than with 100 big blinds. Because when you get it in with 100 big blinds on that flop, you can lose a lot. But king, queen can, you can, if even just a simple analogy, you have, ace, king under the gun, and you make a raise and the button calls you and you have king, queen, or he has king, queen, and the flop comes off with a king on it, and you bet and he calls and the turn comes off, and you decide to, to bet again, and you're now committed to the pot. That player is even going to jam on you because it's going to cost them, let's say 9 blinds to call at that point, and you only have, 20 behind. So at that point, they're making a decision for the stack. And you will see a lot of players just like, because they can't know, think that the top pair is good enough. And it is. And they'll just jam all in on you. And then, of course, you call, and that's that. You got it in with the best hand and 3 outs against you. So it's one of those things that it's important to be aware of, that under the gun, making those top pair strong hands are really much more value. That's like ace 10 getting added in, like he said, is because, you make the top pair 10, that's pretty damn strong, and an ace is actually still pretty strong. You can still, like, if you're out of position, you can still check, and you can make somebody bluff, and it's a whole thing. But on the button, because you don't have enough streets to bluff with, because you have less chips, you have to be playing less hands. So coming from the button with 100 blinds, you have the world open to you. You can, bet and 3-bet and, go bet on the flop, turn, and river and make these big plays. But when you only have 40 blinds, you're going to run out of chips. So you're going to raise pre-flop to 2, and it gets called by the big blind, and the flop comes off, and you decide to c-bet it, let's say at, 2 1/4 maybe, and, he calls you. Now on the turn, you're looking at having 35-ish blinds with 10 in the pot. So if you were to bet the standard bet, that you're going to make there with a good hand, or actually it's going to be like 13 blinds because of the blinds and antes, you're going to have to bet like 10 blinds, and you only have 35 left. So when you bet the 10 and he calls you, now on the river, you're looking at a less than 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio, which means the only bet you have left is all in. And I will do this in certain scenarios, but usually when you've gotten called twice in that scenario, you're up against a player who has a hand who doesn't want to fold, from specifically the button versus big blind. Hey, what's up, Pocket? How you doing, my man? So it's one of those things to be aware of, that your positional advantage, while still amazing, decreases as your stack goes down, and your high card hands go up in value. So your positional advantage is your position is kind of mitigated to a small amount on that mid stack, which is, I guess, the thing to remember in all positions.
Also, you'll notice, like, from the low jack position, the range is the same, right? And that's because, like, sort of in the middle of the table, not a whole lot changes, but from the earlier positions, you get to play a few more hands, and from the later positions, you have to play a few fewer hands.
It's kind of like this. So if you have a big stack and a positional advantage, right? Those are the two extremes of good things. As your stack decreases and starts crossing this line towards a danger zone, your positional advantage becomes less important. Hey, what's up, Pocket? Thanks for the sub, my man. Appreciate it. One of my few resubbers so far. It's only been 2 months, so there you go. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. So as your stack to pot ratio gets lower, and then your positional advantage decreases, the two cross over, and in the middle, you're in the middle positions in the low jack. So you don't really have to adjust that much because those two factors have crossed and mitigated themselves. So it really doesn't matter. In the hijack, I would say, or the low jack and the hijack, I would say. But it's a small thing to be aware of, that if you have a borderline one with 40 big blinds, maybe you don't take it. because, you know, I mean, if it's like a 1 or 2% difference in your head, you maybe don't take it because, man, I don't really have the chips to be fire, 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 you know, at 40 blinds.
So again, all these charts are available at pokercoaching.com. Make sure you get them. I don't think you have to sit down and memorize these perfectly, but you do need to understand roughly what these ranges look like. And the easiest way to do that is to just reference them while you are playing. Let's discuss now.
This is the fun stuff. 40 big blinds from the blinds. Pretty interesting stuff when you're in the small blind. I really love this topic.
Now, small blind strategy. So, as always, your strategy from the small blind depends entirely on the big blind's response. If the big blind's going to fold a lot, just raise a lot. If the big blind's going to 3-bet you a lot, you should raise with a very strong linear range, right? You want to figure out what your opponent is going to do incorrectly and then adjust accordingly. That said, here is the implementable game theory optimal strategy. You see, as we get shallower, because the stack to pot ratio is less, we get to just raise with more hands because you don't really mind playing out of position when the stack to pot ratio is lower. So you see, compared to 75 big blinds, we were raising 18.4% of hands. Now we're raising with 32.8% of hands, which is a whole lot more. You'll see the hands selected are, relatively similar, right? But it's just more of them. So you still see the same like band of kind of junky suited hands raising. On both charts, we just raise a few more of them. Same thing with these random blocker bluffs, same thing, right? And you see just a wider range of value hands raising. So that is your pre-flop strategy when folded to. Definitely make sure you pay attention to stack depth. This is very important, and it is something that many players just completely ignore. So we're going to continue now discussing how to play when different situations occur before the flop.
You'll see charts like this, and it'll say 75 big blinds. You don't want to raise with aces from the small blind pre-flop when everybody folds to you. That's because you're trying to reduce the stack to pot ratio very sharply. So what you're trying to get to have happen here is just limp it. The player in the big blind raises, and then you get to 3-bet. So you have to kind of have that in your head when you see, like, why am I not raising the super premiums? It's because if you raise, the player's just going to call the grand majority of the time, but that same player in a proper range will raise you pre-flop. And when they make it, 3.5 blinds or 4, which is pretty standard from the big blind when somebody limps, you can then go back and make it 10. So when you have 75 big blinds, even if he just calls, there's 20 in the middle, and the effective stack behind is, 50, let's say. That's now only a 2.5 to 1 stack to pot ratio, or pot to stack ratio, I guess. So it's much more likely to get all your money in. Then the flop comes and you can just c-bet right around half pot, and if the player picks up something, he's either going to call, at which point there's 40 in the pot and you have 40 behind. You can get all the money in on the turn with a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio, or you're going to bet and he's going to raise you, and the only raise left is all in right on the flop, and you can just get it in. And blind versus blind, in that scenario, you're going to find people go broke with one pair a lot to aces. So it's a very interesting thing to consider. Playing 40 deep, everyone folds 2 in the low jack with queen jack off. Well, what we're going to do, we're not even going to try. I'm just going to show you guys the way to figure it out. A good way to practice this is I would use a random number generator. I also have done it where I've rolled dice and decided what position I was in, and then randomly generated a hand to decide what to do at certain stack depths. So I would choose the stack depth and say, like, I got 40 blinds, and then roll the dice, and if it comes up, whatever position, then it's like, okay, what's my range look like here? And then try and figure it out, and then look it up and see if I was right. Or what do I do with this hand here? You know what I'm saying? So if I generated a hand, it's like, okay, well, I have to raise this one, and then go back and check the charts. So we'll go back to the tournament pre-flop charts, and we'll see 40 blinds. Everyone folds to the low jack. You have queen jack off. I believe it's a raise. 40 blinds. Position is the low jack. Your actions are raise first in, queen jack off. Where is it? Well, there's suited. Why can I never do this? Okay. Queen jack off right there. It's a raise 100% of the time. It is a value hand, but it also has removal qualities, so it's a good raise. So you're going to go ahead and raise to I guess it's 2.5, right? Yeah. 3 big blinds would be if you had a 100 big blind stack, or 2.75 if you had 100 big blinds. But we can go down to 2.5. 40, you're in the hijack with king 3 suited. Let's see here. Hijack, king 3 suited. That's a fold. That's the line. I like when he makes these questions because the way you learn these charts is not saying, okay, when I have 40 big blinds in the hijack and I'm raising first in, I should raise with aces, ace, king, ace, queen, and try to like run it down in your head. You can literally just say deuce, deuce plus, meaning all the pairs. And you can say king 4 suited plus for all the suited kings and suited aces. You can say queen 7 plus suited. Or actually, you can even go to 10-7 suited. You just memorize the corners. So if you have 10-7 suited, you know you're going to raise it. Well, what are you going to do with Jack 7 suited? Well, that hand's better, so you're going to open with that too. You know what I'm saying? And then you can, get a little specific, 9-7 suited plus, and then you go to 9-9, and you can see the ace-8 off plus. And you just keep these little thoughts in your head. It's like, okay, well, the line here is, for kings, is king 4 plus suited. Other than those, I'm not playing any king 3s, so it's a fold. 40 deep, you're on the button with 9-5 suited. I believe that's a fold. 40 deep, you're on the button because of your positional advantage is mitigated. 9-5 suited. Ooh, it's a raise. Oh, but it's right on the line. See, 9-4 suited fold, 9-5 raise, and obviously that's because the 9-5 makes a straight with 6-7-8. So it makes it just a little bit better. And we're talking about opens versus folds. So you're only going to see 100% versus, 0, except for these really small middle bluffy hands like Jack 7 and Queen 7 off. And those you're playing as a bluff. You're not playing those for value. They're in your middle bluff range. So, yeah, that's a raise. 2.5 or 2.25. 40 deep, you're under the gun +1 with King 8 suited. I mean, I feel like we all know what that should be. King 8 suited is a raise under the gun. +1. Oh, god damn it. I think I'm King 8 suited. Yeah, it's a raise, and you're going to raise 2. I guess you're still raising to 2.25, right? Your position doesn't really matter. So, yeah, it's fine. And those are just good to go through to understand the real ranges that you're playing, because even with King 8 suited, or under the gun +1, if you don't get 3-bet and you make a king, it's going to be good a fair amount of the time. So, if you have 30 blinds and you open this hand and you make a king, you can probably win the pot. You might not be able to get doubled up, but you can probably get some good value. And you'll be able to figure it out if you should fold. 40 deep, you're in the small blind with King 10 off. I believe that is a raise. Let's see here. You're in the small blind, raising first in, King 10 off. It's a raise 41% of the time and a call 59% of the time. So I guess we answer this question by saying it's a call. If it's a raise, we're going to 3.5. See, but your own charts, Jonathan. 40 big blinds, small blind, raising first in. Right? That was the question. King 10 off. I mean, it's more of a call than a raise. But I like to err on the side of aggression. If you ask me off the top of my head what I thought it was, I would say it's a raise. Which I guess is fine because it does fit into that area of value and bluff. Like Jack 9 suited is a value bluff hand, Queen 10 off, King 9, all like that. So yeah, I guess we err on the side of aggression and go with the raise. I mean, that's what I'm doing in game. So I just wanted to look it up by his charts, but I guess it makes sense. If that's what I'm going to do, I should probably do it. Because I'm definitely not folding the hand. And if I'm not folding it, I'm in the small blind, I should probably raise. Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one.
Now let's discuss a situation when your raise gets 3 bets. This is when you make the initial raise, and then someone you have to act 3 bets, they re-raise you. So, as always, you want to ask, who am I against? So if you're against a straightforward opponent who just has a very, very strong hand, you should probably fold a decent portion of your range because they're not bluffing. If you're against a maniac, someone who's 3-betting very frequently, you should be defending with a much larger percentage of your range because their range is much wider, right? Also, you always want to consider your pot odds because
when you consider the strategy, you can look at the person's HUD, and if you see that their numbers are 30, 20, then you can sit there and go, okay, well, this guy's playing 30% of hands and raising almost all of them, raising 2/3 of them. We need to go ahead and loosen up here. But if the player's playing 18-7 or even 18-5 or something like that, you can go, okay, well, he's just doing ABC and he's raising properly. Then you can fold a lot of hands that you should normally be 3-betting with. You can actually go the other way. You got to remember, the adjustment isn't just for a loose player. That's what my problem was. I was very good at picking out, well, this player plays loose, so I wouldn't normally raise the king-9 suited here. I would just fold it, but because it's against him, I'm going to raise. But what I wouldn't do a lot of times is see a straightforward player and adjust the other way. I would sit there and go, oh, well, I have king-jack suited, king-10 suited on the button versus this guy's under the gun +2 range. I should probably 3-bet this. But the player's playing kind of, ABC, which means we're definitely going to have the range disadvantage. So if you have king-10 suited, it's probably a better idea just to call and, see the flop and try to make flushes and straights and 2 pairs than it is to reduce the stack to pot ratio and give him just a great way to stack you when he has even king-jack, which is proper to open there. So it's interesting stuff. It took me a while to adjust the other way. Versus really tight opponents, I was good at it, but you do have to adjust based on your stack, even versus just the straightforward opponent, not average opponent, but straightforward, ABC kind of guy, who's doing by the charts. You kind of have to adjust against that because their range is going to be stronger and more defensible or out of position than yours is.
Because if you're getting great pot odds, you should be defending much wider than if you're getting poor pot odds. For example, say you raise to 2.5 big blinds and someone 3-bets to 5 big blinds. Well, now you have to call 2.5 big blinds more into a pot that's going to be about 12.5 big blinds. So will you realize 20% equity with any decent hand you raised with? Probably, right? If you make it 2.5 big blinds and they make it 15, though, well, now you have to put in 12.5 big blinds into a pot that's going to be about 32.5. So now will you realize 30% equity? And it's much harder to do. So pot odds are very relevant. Also, your post-flop playability is still relevant because we are somewhat deep stacked. You're going to find that hands like ace-x offsuit, like if you raise ace-8 offsuit and someone 3-bets you, this is just not a hand you can continue under pretty much any circumstance because it plays so poorly post-flop. Whereas a hand like jack-10 suited is still pretty playable because we are deep stacked enough at this point. So let's suppose you raise to 2.5 big blinds from the low jack seat with ace-jack offsuit, and then the button 3-bets to 7.5 big blinds out of its 45 big blind effective stack. Think back to our grid we have here and consider what our opponent's strategy is. Against a tight aggressive player, you're typically just going to want to follow the charts and play reasonably. But against a tight player, a nit, what do you think you should do? What about a calling station, someone who plays a lot of hands but is not very aggressive? What should you do? What about against a loose aggressive player who's 3-betting you a ton? Right?
You fold versus the nit because they're just going to have your range crushed. You call more versus the calling station because while they don't tend to raise as much, they're playing a lot of hands, so you can actually get a lot of value out of them when they have pairs and they pay you off when you have an overcard hits and you have it. Loose aggressive players, you should probably be 3-betting more because they are going to use their position against you way too much, and you can take that away by reducing the stack to pot ratio. So that's my opinion.
Realize that your strategy depends heavily on your opponent's tendencies. So you're going to see, against a tight player, you just want to fold because whenever they do 3-bet you, they probably have a good hand. Against the calling station, you should usually call. I would say that folding is still viable if they are very, very tight when it comes.
A lot of calling stations call a lot of hands and only raise super strong, so that's something to be aware of. But some of them do have a proper raising range and just an improper calling range, where they'll get 10 jack suited in any position and they're playing it no matter what happens because 10 jack suited. But if you give them aces, obviously they're going to raise. If you give them king queen, obviously they're going to raise. You know what I'm saying? So calling versus those hands is, obviously beneficial because you can either be way ahead, or way behind.
It comes to their 3-bet percentage, but usually people who are playing a lot of hands in general 3-bet more hands. So you're going to find that usually people who have a very high V, a very high voluntarily put dollars in pot, also have a reasonable pre-flop raise. But if their pre-flop raise is like 3, like they're never raising pre-flop or re-raising pre-flop, then you should just fold as well. Against a loose aggressive player, you probably just want to be all in. If they're 3-betting very frequently, this is a really good hand to use as a bluff, and that will allow you to just rip it in and then win the pot a huge portion of the time. As your stack size decreases, you're going to find that your implied odds also decrease, and this is going to become a very important concept as we get shallower and shallower stacked. So suppose someone raises to 2.5 big blinds out of their 45 big blind effective stack. You are basically calling here to win a pot that's going to be 7.5 big blinds immediately plus 42.5 big blinds remaining in the stacks. Doing that math, you're getting 22-1 implied odds, which means you can basically play any implied odds hand still at this point. So remember, with your small pairs, you want to be getting at least 10-1, and then with your suited connectors and suited aces, you want to be getting at least 20-1. As you see in that scenario, facing an open raise, you are getting 20-1 or more, allowing you to play those hands. Remember, if you're not getting the correct implied odds, which may happen once you start getting 3-bet, you want to consider if your hand can continue based on its own merit. Like if you raise and with pocket 8s and someone 3-bets you, pocket 8s is still pretty good. You probably don't want to fold it. But if you raise with a hand like pocket 2s and you get 3-bet, pocket 2s plays really poorly after the flop and you probably need to fold it. Realize, again, as stacks get shorter, you will not be getting the correct implied odds all that often, which is going to force you to either go all in or fold with your speculative hands, depending on your opponent's tendencies. If your opponents are 3-betting you a lot, taking a hand like 9-8 suited and just shoving it all in is actually not so insane in some of these scenarios because you have a lot of fold equity. Let's take a look at...
That's the concept, is it goes from, a player raises, or you open the 9-8 suited, like he's saying, on the button and get 3-bet. You both have 45 blinds, you get 3-bet from the small blind. If it's a player who does this, chronically, that's a good one to jam all in with, not because of the card removal, but because of your positional advantage, plus you allow the players to make mistakes and fold. And it really does have to be all in. You make it 2.5 and a guy makes it 7.5. A standard raise can only really be done with a super strong hand that's not aces. So like queens, something like that. Aces or kings, though, I actually think you do better to call in that when you're in position and to just jam when you're out of position, because the jamming looks super weak out of position and the calling also looks weak. But if you reverse those positions, then they become strong moves. So, your only bet left is all in when it's 7.5, because if you triple it, you've got half your fucking stack in. And when you do that, most of the time you should just jam your chips in. And it makes it very hard to play against you. When a player has ace-queen in the small blind and they do this, it's going to be hard for them to call, but a lot of players will still make the mistake, and you're going to crush with the range that you do that with a lot of times.
This math just to confirm it's true. Say you raise to 2.5 big blinds and someone 3-bets to 8 out of their 45 big blind effective stack. Here you're calling 5.5 to potentially win the 18.5 big blind pot plus the 37 remaining in the stacks. You do the math, that gives you 10-1 implied odds. So in this scenario, you can barely call with the small pairs, which usually results in me folding out the small pairs, but pocket pairs like 6s and higher usually still acceptable to defend in this scenario, but the lower ones, they just play so poorly you probably just want to fold them. But notice here the suited connected hands.
It's funny because my line, I was thinking of 8s as the one you should call with and fold everything lower than that, but he's probably right. Well, I mean, he's definitely right. 5s are just too weak, but 6s I think should be the line because of the fact of making the straights and getting the good draws and stuff like that. And sometimes you're going to get nothing, but the board's going to run out in a way where your opponent's not going to want to bet. It's going to come off, 9, 8, 4, deuce, 7, and so you don't have anything except a pair of 6s. But versus ace king who 3-bet and is out of position, he's going to end up checking flop and turn a lot, and then you can hero that on the river a ton because they're just going to take usually one shot. A lot of players will do the delayed c-bet there, where they'll just check the flop and then bet the turn, and then if you call, they usually give up. Pro tip, if you're going to do that, you have to bet the river. So understand, you're betting the turn big after you check the flop, and then 2/3 pot, and then the river you're betting pretty much the same. So it's risky, but it works a very high percentage of the time in situations where if you had checked, you would have lost, and I hate those. If I can keep from losing to a pair that wouldn't call a bet, and I don't do it, I really feel bad about myself for my play that day, because that's a mistake you should just never make.
Are not quite getting the right implied odds at this point, which is going to result in you having to fold them at this stack depth, or potentially call if you're in position, or if your opponent's a little bit too loose, or if your opponent's maniacal, maybe you can just rip it in if you think they're going to fold a lot. So let's take a look at a few scenarios. Here we have under the gun +2 versus the cutoff, and under the gun +2 against the big blind. Remember, the big blind should be using a bigger 3-bet size than the cutoff, which is why you're defending a little bit tighter in these charts from the big blind. But let's take a look at the overall strategy. You'll find that the same logic from earlier still applies, where you are generally re-raising more often from out of position. So when you're in the cutoff, you're 3-betting a little bit more. Notice 14.7% compared to 12.5% when you're in position. So notice that trend is usually going to hold true. And you typically just call a little bit more from in position. But because we were facing a bigger raise size, you're going to find that's not going to be the case in these scenarios. Because when you're just getting better odds, you're going to want to continue decently wide. So this is all worth noting. These opening ranges may be a little bit wide. If you think your opponents are going to be 3-betting you a lot, you should be folding some of these hands like King 6 suited, King 7 suited, Jack 8 suited just initially. But I think these ranges are pretty fine and self-explanatory. One thing you will note, though, compared to the 75 big blind charts, you actually get to defend more as you get shallower stacked. Notice in the exact same scenario, but deeper stacked, you have to fold 34.6% of hands. Shallower stacked, you only fold 22.1% of hands.
And again, that's because when you make a pair, you're more happy to get it in with less blinds than you are with more blinds.
You may say, why is that? Well, the reason is because if you just make top pair when you're playing 40 big blinds deep, you're usually going to be putting your money in and it's okay. Whereas when you're deeper stacked, that is not the case. So as you get shallower and shallower, you should typically be defending against 3-bets more frequently.
The concept that got this into my head was playing 1-2 years ago, and I remembered there were certain games around town. I remember when I played at places like Harrah's and Bally's and a couple other places, smaller rooms, more locals, but still on the strip. Bill's was a good one for that, or Hooters, you know what I'm saying? You just saw these guys who were just in the same room all the time. South Point's a good example, but you don't see this buy-in structure. I realized that I was at a significant disadvantage buying in for the max, which, playing 1-2 was $300. And it gave me a huge disadvantage because all the stacks I was playing against were effective $100 stacks, meaning they only have 50 blinds. So if I raise and they're 3-betting, it's kind of over. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when I would be in a situation where I would, somebody would raise and I would 3-bet, and then they would call the flop, and if they made a pair, they just weren't going anywhere. Now, I eventually figured out that this is the way to beat them by buying in for their effective stack. If the effective stack is about 100 on the table, you just take 100 plus a little more, and then just try to outmaneuver them when you can, because you can still make a c-bet bluff, but then it's pretty much over. What you would see happen a lot is a player would open, and they open small to like $6, and then I would make it something like, I don't know, 15 or 20, somewhere in there. Usually around 15 was enough. It would go back to the initial raiser, they would call it, and the flop would come off, and now we only have about 85 blinds or $85 effective in each of our stacks, and there's 15 in the middle. So the stack to pot ratio is only like 4-1. It's not great. So if the flop came off queen high and I didn't have a queen, if I was sitting there with ace king, I would see the player check and I would just check back instead of representing that queen because I could have had ace queen. No, that wasn't the thing to do. And then, a lot of times what would happen is you'd either make the pair on the turn or the river, And these players wouldn't bet until, until they were convinced. So if the turn came off and it was an ace, you could actually bet, and they would call you, and you would get a street of value. And then on the river, they would try to blocker bet you or something like that. And it was just one of those interesting things where if I had 300 blinds, these players would not only have the advantage over me because of their short buy-in when talking about stacked pot, but also typically it sent the wrong message. It sent the message that I was loose with my money. Because when everybody's only got $100 on the table and you buy in for 300, what does that tell people? I'm willing to lose this 300. I looked around that table and you knew within 5 minutes of being there, those guys were only going to lose the $100, then they were going to leave. And there were several days I remember where I bought in for 100, busted a guy, and then he would just get up and walk away, and another one would come in and sit down at the table, and then he would bust, and then he would go away, and another one would come back for $100 every time. And it was good action, and eventually when I figured it out, it was great money. But at the same time, I had to change the strategy overall because of the stack to pot ratios. These players were just trying to make big pairs and get the money in. Like they weren't poker players, they were gamblers.
Which is kind of interesting to some people. They think they should be tighter and more passive as they get shallower, but that's actually not true. Also notice you are 4-betting way less off, especially when you're going to be in position when you are deeper stacked. Whenever you're deep stacked, you want to keep the stack to pot ratio very, very deep because that allows you to maximize your positional advantage. But as you get shallower, position starts to matter a little bit less, which results in you re-raising more often. Also notice whenever you are re-raising at this stacked at 40 big blinds, you're actually just jamming all in. So you do not have the ability to 4-bet and still fold at this point. So if you raise to, let's say, 2.5, somebody 3-bets to 7 or 8, you're just all in for 40. You're not making it 18 or 20 or something like that, because at that point you already have roughly 40% of your stack in, and if they do jam on you, you're getting the right odds to call anyway. So that's one.
And it's not like you're getting the right odds to call anyway, so fuck it. It's my best chance to get this fold is the jam, because that actually means something. You know what I'm saying? So you make it 2.5, guy makes it 8, and you make it 20 on 40 blinds. You only have 20 left. So he's going to sit there and go, well, I'm not going to fold pocket 10s for 12 blinds, so I might as well get it in now. And you'll see him just go, fuck it. And now you're sitting there with pocket 9s or whatever, and, king, queen or something, and you're like, shit, now I'm playing a 40 big blind race. And you kind of have to. But when you make it 2.5, he makes it 8, and it comes back to you, and you just jam with the playable range, which is what you're going to do a lot in that scenario. Now his pocket 10s are like, fuck. Now I have to call, 32 blinds to win, 82. And the best case scenario for me here is a race with these pocket 10s. They really don't even look that good from the big blind. Like, you'll see a lot of players open fold that. They'll fold it and then show the hand. Just because they're like, you must have jacks. Like, and everybody goes to jacks for some reason. And even then, when they do call you, you're gonna have hands like ace king, queen queen, king jack suited, all hands like that. And these are hands that do just fine because you end up racing and you made the other player make the mistake.
One example. Let's take a look at another example. Here we have wider ranges. We have cutoff against the button and cutoff against the big blind, 40 big blinds deep. As you see, same patterns still are going to hold true. You are jamming more from out of position. It's going to result in you jamming less from from in position, right? Same thing holds true. Again, if
it seems like a small thing, but these all in as bluffs, the difference here is only this percentage. You're looking at the percentage of total hands. So it doesn't seem like much. And the difference here is really only a small shift in the hands. When you are on the button, you should be doing it with a more workable range. Whereas when you're in the big blind, you're doing it with a more, the junkier the hand, the better kind of thing. So, when you make this 4-bet all in as a bluff, having ace 5 down to ace deuce, the steel wheel cards, that's fine. And king jack and, or king jack suited and queen jack suited, that's also fine. Because these hands have good removal, these king jack, king suited, you're removing an ace here every time. And when you get called, you'd like to be able to make a straight because, being on the button, you're going to get called by a wider range, or you're going to get called by a slightly tighter range jamming. Whereas if you're in the big blind, the 4-bet bluff where, the player raises, or player limps, like let's say the small blind or the button or whatever, and you raise and they 3-bet. Well, now your jams need to be comprised more of bad hands than workable hands. You can still do it with the workable hands, but this is where ace 4 and ace 5 lose value, because those hands are so good, you should only be calling. You shouldn't be jamming because you're in position. I'm saying post flop. Whereas ace 6 suited is just the worst. It's not even in the range for jams other than that. Ace 6 suited is the worst suited ace in the deck. So jamming there as a bluff makes more sense because the hand's not going to do well enough post flop. So jamming becomes a much more reasonable option.
Both players use the same re-raise size. You would be defending more often when you are in position, but if your opponent's good and they're using bigger re-raise size out of position, you have to be a little bit tighter. But all this seems pretty logical, pretty self-explanatory, right? Notice that a smattering of bluffs are used all in. Usually they are good blocker hands or hands that have good equity. You'll find that like King Jack suited has good equity, right? You'll find that just the really junky hands end up folding. Like hands like Queen 6 suited, I definitely do not think you need to defend with those. Realize that all the hands that are on the cusp of playability really are actually on the cusp of playability, and I think folding is certainly viable. Again, comparing this to the deeper stacked examples, you see here, we are using a different selection of blocker hands.
It's a good little trick to remember that if you don't know if a hand should be played, if it's on the cusp and you can't make the decision, go up or down one blind level in the thing. So like, let's say you're in the low jack here with 40 big blinds and King 5 suited is a raise, right? If you're not sure if it should be a raise, or let's make it easier, versus a 3-bet here, low jack versus a 3-bet from the opponent's position of on the button. So King 5 suited is a call here, right? You opened it and called. But if you didn't know that, you could go, well, what is it if I have more blinds? Like if I have 60 blinds, and you can see King 5 suited drops off. All these hands drop off. And you can go, okay, well, then maybe that's on the cusp. What if you go down to 30 big blinds? Then what happens? Well, it's still out of there. So you can see that the King 5 suited is exactly the cusp where it's playable versus a 3-bet from the button after you've opened in the low jack, but it drops off if you had a few less blinds and a few more blinds. If I don't know what to do, I just shove. Believe it or not, Pocket, you say you're just joking, but believe it or not, that's actually a better strategy than you think. And if you think I'm wrong, years ago, about 15 years ago, Phil Hellmuth, when he was making his I'm the best poker player ever lived thing all the time, and he's been doing that ever since. I believe it was the same year he came dressed as Caesar to the Heads Up Challenge at Caesar's Palace. They set up a thing where they taught a monkey how to jam all in pre-flop. So they taught the monkey that if it was his turn on the small blind, he played heads up, right? If the monkey was in the small blind and he saw a jack or higher in his hand, he would jam all in. If he was on the big blind, right, so the other player opened, if he had a face card in his hand, he would just jam all in. That was the whole thing. They trained this monkey to do that, and they put him up against Phil Hellmuth, and you can find it somewhere online. It's very obscure, but Hellmuth lost. Because Hellmuth had the ability to fold, and versus an all-in range, you kind of get stuck, and you kind of just have to gamble, and Hellmuth lost definitively, because it was just impossible to defend against. So if you're on you'll see it happen with me, usually on turns where I don't really know what's going on, and I'm like, but I should have the best hand here. That's a moment to either fold or go all in. And I've done it for just, it looks like insane amounts, but it really makes, very good sense. So it's not the worst strategy in the world. Calling is usually much worse than going all in.
Right? Whenever we're deeper stacked on the left-hand side, when we raise the cutoff in the button 3-bets, also notice we are folding way, way, way more often. Notice 42 and 45% when we're deeper stacked, 32 and 41% when we are shallower stacked. So slightly different strategies get used in both scenarios. I suppose I should point out, you are still 4-bet bluffing sometimes. I think a lot of people think, I can never 4-bet bluff all in. But turns out you actually do. Interestingly enough, King Jack suited and Queen Jack suited really like jamming. Suited connectors really like jamming. I'm sorry, suited aces really like jamming. But you will notice that the hands that are used as all-in bluffs typically have pretty good equity when they get called at this point, and that's because you are going to get called some portion of the time. So you'll find that you're usually not bluffing too often with the other marginal hands because they lack blockers. Remember I said earlier, though, if you raise someone maniacal 3-bets you can conceivably jam with some of these suited connectors that are not quite good enough to call, right? Like 8-7 suited, 7-6 suited, maybe even something like 10-8 suited, Jack-8 suited. These are all hands that do shove all in okay if your opponent's going to fold too often, but they're not the default hands or the ideal hands to be jamming.
I will say it happens to me on a daily basis where I'll raise and somebody will 3-bet and I'll come back, it'll come back to me and I'll be thinking this hand's not good enough to call. And the decision is to go all in. It happens daily in tournaments where you're just like, I can't really call with this 9-8 suited, but he can't really call without a premium range here. And this player is kind of loosey-goosey and likes to take away the positional disadvantage by 3-betting. So I'm going to just go ahead and shove these 35 blinds in here and, just watch him squirm and fold, you know what I'm saying? And it's really a lot of fun once you get the concept down. Until you do it enough and really understand why you're doing it and with what hands you're doing it for, it's nerve-wracking. I actually, having the Apple Watch playing live, I would turn it around when I was playing at South Point because I had it set to monitor heart rate, and I found that the only time I really got a blip and the watch would give me the little tap was either after we got all the money in and I had the nuts, then my heart would jump, or when I was playing the 4-bet bluff all in. And go to a 1-2 table and try to play a 4-bet bluff all in and see how often you get away with it. And I didn't get called once. I only did it like 3 or 4 times. Did it in the tournaments quite a bit that I played over there, but in the cash games it really got my heart going. But after the first 3 or 4, I was just like, okay, and I just recognized the spots, and it was a lot of fun. But it's just a good thing to remember that it can be very nerve-wracking when you're getting a new concept down, and you have to you got to pull the trigger. And but once you get to a certain point, I think your trigger is just very accessible when you're like, oh, this is a sound move, and you just bang.
Also notice, like I said, the implied odds rule starts to apply as the raise size you're facing gets bigger and bigger, because remember the big blind's going to be 3-betting to a bigger size. You see that the pairs can still call because they're getting 10-1, but the suited connectors, especially the weaker ones, have to start folding, and that's because they lack post-flop playability and they're not quite getting the correct pot odds, whereas notice when you're shallower stacked, the suited connectors do still get to continue. Right? So that's what you want to be doing whenever you raise and someone 3-bets you. I realize it is a big topic and it's a tough spot to play. But really what it amounts to is you need to be calling a decent amount, calling with a well-protected range. Notice like pocket aces calls, ace-queen suited calls, king-queen suited calls. Like pretty good hands are calling in this spot. And then you're jamming with just generally good hands plus a few blockers.
It is a big topic. But here's the thing. If a tournament goes well for you, this is where you're going to spend the majority of your time. Where you're going to be able to be active the whole time. You're going to be between 35 and 60 big blinds the whole time, usually right around 40. So I would say most people talk about, I don't play well on a short stack. I don't know what to do with a big stack. Those are easy fixes. But there's so much to learn about being at 40 to 45 big blinds. And it is the majority of the time you're going to spend in the tournament is at that stake. And if you stay at 40 big blinds the entire tournament, you're going to be having a very good shot to win it. When you get to the final table with 40 big blinds, that's pretty powerful. Then you are the big stack, but these rules still apply because you're at 40 big blinds. So understanding this level is truly, truly, I think, one of the most important things. And closely behind it is how to play a short stack. Closely. But just because you're going to end up there the second most of the time. You're not going to have 100 big blinds very often in tournaments, except for at the start, All right, let's go here. You raised to 2.5 big blinds out of your 45 big blind stack with 3-3 from the cutoff. Strong player from the button 3-bets to 6.5. Can you profitably call? Well, let's do a little math. Bring out the calculator. Where'd it go? What the hell? Oh, where is it? Oh, there it is. It's black, and it was on my black background. So let's see. You made it 2.5 plus the opponent's raise 6.5 plus the blinds and antes 2.5. Oh, wait a minute. What did I do there? 2.5 plus 6.5 plus the blinds and antes 2.5 is 11. Your call would have to be for 4, so you add 4 to that. So it costs you 2.5 to win the 15.5. So we're going to go divided by 2.5 equals you're getting 6-2 right now. But also there's the player's stack behind. So he's going to have, what does he have? 38, 37.50. So plus 37.5. 53 blinds is your expected value, divided by your call. Oh, divided by your call of 4. 13.25. Yes, you can profitably call because you need 10 to 1. Yeah. Your excellent implied odds, you can profitably call. You only need 10 to 1. You got 13.5. You raised 2.5 big blinds out of 60 big blind stack with ace-10 suited from the cutoff. Strong player in a small blind, 3 bets to 8 big blinds. Can you profitably call? This is a little bit different because ace-10 plays for value and for flushes, or for implied odds. So let's just do the math and figure it out. So let's just count it. His whole 60 big blind stack plus your 2.5 plus the blinds and antes. Oh, he's in the small blind. So just 2. Because it was absorbed by the small blind. So 64.5, and it costs you 5.5 to call. So divided by 5.5, 11.72. It's kind of cuspy. I want to look it up. 2.5, 60 big blinds. Let's look it up. 60 big blinds. Where are we? Let's see. We're in the cutoff strong player. Small blind, 3 bets to 8. Small blind. Okay. So we're in the cutoff versus a 3 bet from the small blind. Very strong player. Ace-10 suited. Looks like a call. Yeah. He is a very strong player, so it's whatever, but because of the amount of implied odds we get, we can call with all suited aces. And we do have positions, so yeah, you can profitably call. 2.5 out of 40 with ace-4 suited in the cutoff. Strong player, 3 bets to 9. What should you do? This is kind of, now we're getting to the other side of the coin here. So his 40 big blind stack plus our 2.5 plus he's on the button plus 2.5 for the blinds and antes is 45. It costs you 6.5, so divided by 6.5. 6.9, probably 7. You need 20 to 1 here. You're not getting it, but should you go all in? That is the question. He is a strong player. This might be an all-in. Even though we're not doing great. Nah, you know what? He's a strong player. I'm going to call it a fold. Yeah, it's a go all-in. Yeah, ace-5 and ace-deuce are great 4-bluff bet hands. Yeah, that is one of those ones. But see, that's the thing. A strong player doesn't really tell me if he's loose aggressive, if he's, ABC, if he's, a tight aggressive kind of guy with more nitty properties. But I guess versus just your average strong player, I guess strong means having the proper raising ranges. I guess the jam is proper, even though we're not getting the correct, because we're not getting the correct implied odds to call. Like if we were getting 20 to 1, then yeah, you don't even think about it, you just call. But because we're not getting that, the question becomes, do we fold or jam? And this is a jam versus the strong range. Nice. Going to mark this as complete.
Now
I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go back to the courses and make sure everything got checked off. Tournament Masterclass. And come down here, 35 to 60 big blinds. Yep, got through the first 2 sections. There's looks like 6 more sections here. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I got to do a few things. I want to play today, but I'm going to be honest, I didn't get much sleep last night because I've been editing. I have all the spots cut for it, and I want to put it together, so I'm going to be doing that today. This is all the scenes, because this is the Jedi Archive one. So this is all the hands that I didn't get to use over the last 2 months and put them into a Jedi mind trick. That's all the stuff on the side, and it's just funny hands and funny moments and interesting things that happened and good hands I played, but they didn't really fit a narrative, so I just kind of held on to them. But you can see there's a ton of them there, and I made a new intro. So I'm really excited to get that up on YouTube. I'm going to post it on Twitch too because fuck it, why not? Maybe I'll get some people to the YouTube. But yeah, so I'll see you guys probably later today playing something. If not, I'll be back at noon tomorrow. I'm not going to bother hosting. There's a lot of players out there right now, and I'll let you guys make your own choice. But I'll see you later today, hopefully, and have a good day.